I am pleased to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Lauren Lee. Lauren is a lecturer in data-driven chemical process system engineering at University College London. She holds a PhD from Imperial College London, and her research focuses on computer-aided molecular process and reaction design. Lauren, over to you.
Thank you for the warm introductions. And yes, I'm Lauren Lee. So today I'm going to talk about bridging molecular designs and synthesis with special focus on AI and automation for reaction optimization. So to set this in, I want to start with a simple but broad questions. How can we effectively and rapidly discover new chemical products? So this question underpins almost everything we do in molecular design, such as developing solvents for CO2 capture, discovering new drugs, developing better energy materials. But of course, the chemical design space we deal with is often very huge. So searching for the right molecule is a bit like searching for a specific atom in the universe. So experimentally evaluating these large design space is combinatorially complex, expensive, and extremely slow. So this is where computer-aided molecular design, in short, CAMD, comes into play. So by leveraging computational tools, we can systematically navigate the design space and identify promising molecular candidates and optimize them for desired properties and performance. Modern CAMD framework follow a loop. First, you need to encode or represent the molecule and then predict their properties and then search for optimal candidates. And we rely on two core components in CAMD workflow. First, we build molecular property prediction model that maps molecular structure to properties like solubility, kinetics, or binding affinity, to name a few. Those models can be mechanistic or data-driven. And second, we need optimization algorithms, which applies mathematical or AI-based techniques to decide which molecule to evaluate next, and eventually find optimal ones. And our research group has focused on developing both property prediction models and also optimization algorithm across many small molecule application domains, small organic molecule, I should say. And by combining these two elements, CAMD enable us to identify a much smaller set of optimal molecular candidates to test, which would dramatically reduce the number of experiments we need to perform. And one more thing. So my background in chemical engineering, so I should always mention the industrial setting or scale up. So in real industrial settings, molecules do not exist in isolation. They must operate inside or with a process. So often considerations of both a molecular level and process level decision variables is essential. So let's take amine-based solvent design for CO2 chemical absorption process as one example. So a solvent like monoethanol amines MEA may show excellent molecular property like high CO2 solubility, fast reaction kinetics, but when placed inside of an absorber and desorber, the overall process may perform poorly. For example, heat exchanger constraint, regeneration energy, or solvent stability can completely change the solvent ranking. So the disconnect between the molecular and process scale is a major barrier in solvent design. Similarly, for active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturing, CAMD techniques may give us an optimal solvents or reaction route, but scale up introduce new constraints like toxicity, separation feasibility, and crystallization behavior. So these multi-scale barriers often invalidate the CAMD optimal choice when moving from lab scale to plant scale. So to address this kind of gap between the molecular level optimality and process level feasibility, we have been developing novel framework that can combine molecular level decisions with process level decision. So we want to simultaneously optimize those two different variables at different scales. Of course, we can take sequential approach where we often first generate the promising molecules, then test them inside the process. But in this specific case, this solvent designed for CO2 capture, we found that the molecule that looks good at the molecular level turned out invisible at the process level. So we wasted several iterations evaluating invisible molecules. And in contrast, if we use the integrated approach where we embed process constraint directly into the molecular optimization, we can identify, we always search the feasible molecule in terms of the process. And then we can identify the better solvents that shows higher energy efficiency and also better economic performance. So as you can see, chem help us designing promising molecule, especially when it can be combined with process evaluation. But as you can imagine, as Omar said, molecular design or molecular discovery involves more than just design. Once we select the candidate virtually, we still need to actually synthesize these molecules. And this is often the true bottleneck in the discovery process. So for example, here we compare the three optimal CO2 capturing solvents. By the way, MEA is a baseline. Those two the molecule, the solvent that we identify through the simultaneous optimization framework. But when we investigated the synthetic complexity using SC score, which measured, as name suggests, it measured the synthetic complexity, a higher score indicates a greater difficulty. It seems that they both two shows kind of moderate complexity. But when we actually use the one of the state-of-the-art retrosynthesis tool to identify the feasible reaction route, we couldn't find any feasible reaction route. So we developed the simultaneous design framework. We run the optimization. We identify the solvents. But despite the promising property, we cannot just synthesize this molecule. So we just wasted the whole our attempt. So, and this is where today's talk shift. Reaction optimization, reaction predictions all play a central role in turning a designed molecule into a practical product. So the big question becomes, how do we design reactions with the same level of efficiency that we design molecule? So before we talk about the reaction optimization or predictions, I want to briefly motivate why we are also building automated workflow. It is basically to have a high quality, well-curated reaction data sets that can be used for the development of reaction prediction and optimization framework. And for this, we first focused on optimizing amide coupling reactions, given the importance of amide bonds in medicinal chemistry. And one of the simplest and scalable methods is liquid phase condensations of carboxylic acids and amine in the presence of base coupling agents, and etc. And the problem here is even seemingly straightforward amide coupling can be tricky. They are highly sensitive to the choice of coupling agent, solvents, and base and temperature, and so on. And also, one motif we were especially interested in was acrylamide, which can form covalent interactions with biological targets. And this motif can be attached perhaps through the amide coupling reaction. But of course, there is difficulty. As you can see in this acrylic acid, one of the starting material, you see unsaturated alpha beta carbonyl, and these make them prone to unwanted side reaction. So careful selections of reaction conditions is essential. So here our objective was to first systematically generate reaction data across the design space of interest using automation. Then develop predictive models to relate reaction performance to conditions, and finally use this model to optimize reaction condition efficiently. And much of our experimental work takes place in the Manufacturing Future Lab at UCL East, where we have access to robotic synthetic systems, online analytics, and flow chemistry platforms, as well as flexible tools for reaction screening and process monitoring. We also have fabrication workshops, so that means we can customize our labware, and then also we can come up with the bespoke reactor modules, and these really allow us to build the custom automated chemistry platform. So here's a snapshot of what those automated workflow look like. And experimental work is still ongoing, so I cannot show the full the results of this experiment. But what I can say here is, as we move into generating experimental data, we wanted to make sure that our chemical were soluble in the testing solvents, as insoluble chemical in reaction can compromise scalability and reproducibility at the end. Because we are a chemical engineer, we need to think about how we can scale up and also design the reactor at the end. So we tested the solubility of 17 chemical, including 9 solid across multiple solvents, actually 4 solvents, which required over 2,000 individual liquid transfer. So to handle this efficiently, we developed a semi-automated solubility testing workflow, as you can see in this video clip, and alongside the semi-automated chemical synthesis workflow. So briefly speaking, in terms of the results for solubility testing, we observed significant variability in the solubility of our starting chemicals, with concentrations spanning a wide range. So this really highlights the critical needs for solubility-aware reaction planning, so that we can better predict the reaction yield at the end. And for amide synthesis, although, like I said before, I'm not presenting detailed data here today, our preliminary results show a wide diversity in reaction outcomes, and these early findings empathize the importance of optimizing reaction conditions to achieve the right balance between the yield, scalability, and reproducibility. So this workflow gives us consistent solubility and reaction data sets, and these data sets are what ultimately support the optimizations and modeling work that I'll show next. So we've seen the automation help us run reaction reliably and collect the data at scale, but automation alone doesn't solve the optimization problem. Even with high-throughput experimentation, even with automation, we can only test a small fraction of all possible conditions. So reaction space are often high-dimensional, non-linear, and depends on many factors like solvents, base, temperature, times, and so on. So what we really need is a systematic and data-driven way to explore these design space. So something that learns, we need a model or algorithm that learns as it goes and avoid wasting experiments. And that's where Bayesian optimization becomes powerful. But optimization also needs good predictive models, a model that understands reaction performance like yield and kinetics, and also solubility and solvent effect, if you are talking about the reaction kinetics. And importantly, one that captures real chemistry rather than just correlation. So let's talk about the Bayesian optimization first. As mentioned, Bayesian optimization provides a powerful framework for designing experiments. However, when we try to apply these methods to real chemical system, we immediately face some major challenges. One of the challenges I'd like to mention here today is the chemical space we typically deal with. The difficulty is that the chemical space we deal with is often mixed type. That means we need to handle categorical, integer, and continuous variables simultaneously. And these variables often have constraints related to chemical compatibility, experimental feasibility, or safety. So let me illustrate this with a concrete example. which is about solvent optimization, solvent design to maximize reaction kinetics in Mann-Chicken reaction. So you already know the role of solvent in reaction. So basically, by choosing this correct or suitable solvent, you can reduce this reaction activation energy, meaning you can enhance the reaction kinetics. So here's the objective is to identify the optimal solvents that maximize reaction constant log K, which is determined by this reaction activation free energy. But of course, computing this reaction activation energy through quantum mechanical calculations or experiments is expensive. So we want to minimize the number of evaluation. The design space is large and mixed type again. We were considering 46 functional group defining solvent structure. So by choosing the type of functional group, the number of function of each groups, you can build a certain molecule. It's kind of like a Lego block. And also we have categorical and boundary variable in our design space. And also more than 100 feasibility constraints were involved. So I'm talking about both equality and inequality constraints. So for example, those feasibility constraints were needed to make sure molecular structures are physically and structurally feasible. And also we also need to make sure that solvent stays in liquid phase. So we may want to introduce constraints for boiling points and melting points. And also solvents should be safe. So you may want to introduce some constraints on toxicity. So this is exactly the kind of space where Bayes optimization should help, but only if the optimizer can properly handle this mixed variable and constraints. So how we deal with this mixed integer constrained design space? We used a method called piecewise affine surrogate modeling, or PWAS, which handles mixed variable inputs directly. So no discretization, no relaxations introduced in here. And it works by partitioning the design space and fitting the local affine model within each clusters. And this approach is implemented through called PARC, which iteratively refined a cluster based on how separable and predictive they are. This was developed by one of our previous PhD students, Mangju. I think she is she's in the audience today. And this concept allowing us to model sharp transitions in reactivity with solvent structures that global model often smooth over. And as it is because a direct mixed integer linear reformulation, we can also use off-the-shelf MILP, mixed integer linear programming solver, and also handle mixed integer nonlinear constraints directly. And here are the results from applying our PWAS framework to the solvent design for enhanced reaction kinetics. And the algorithm was able to recover true top 10 solvents. And on the right, we show the radar charts of the selected solvent candidate across the key properties. So each triangle here represents a different solvent. So in the first 10 iteration, the model explores broadly across the property space. So you see the different area of the triangle. But by the last 10, it converged towards a focused region, which shows efficient exploitations of high-performing area. So these demonstrates that the PWAS is balancing explorations and exploitation properly while staying entirely within the chemically feasible regions, just because it can handle also the constraints. We also demonstrated the method's effectiveness by applying it to the reaction condition optimization for Suzuki coupling and achieved similarly strong performance. And the second major challenge is that the most machine learning model still operates on incomplete reaction context. And current models often rely on simplified molecular representation. For example, they rely on small strings or 2D graph, which means they ignore 3D geometry, steric hindrance, or electronic effect, all crucial for chemical reactivity. They also miss reaction dynamics such as conformational changes and transition states, which can lead to limited generalizability and poor extrapolation. But as you can imagine, including such information, of course, can be computationally intensive and often not scalable. So to address the issue, we have worked on several studies. And let's start with the development of reaction yield prediction model. To capture the static and electronic feature efficiently, we explored whether we can use so-called FRED methods, a fractional denoising molecular pre-training method developed by Ni et al. FRED, by the way, perturb equilibrium geometry with realistic noise like rotations and vibrations, and train a model to denoise back to the equilibrium conformations. Such denoising technique was particularly interesting to us as it yields geometry embeddings, and it can tolerate less accurate molecular geometry as an input by learning conformational distributions around the equilibrium structure rather than relying on one-to-one mapping between the optimized structure to the molecular properties. And that means it can generate meaningful embedding without doing DFT geometry optimization, the expensive computational method. So FRED is a general molecular foundational model. It's not reaction-specific model, but we hypothesized that it could help with reaction yield prediction, a downstream task. So we fine-tune the QM9 pre-trained FRED model on the Berg-Hartwig reaction datasets. The dataset cover more than 4,000 combinations of aryl halide, bases, ligands, and additives. And as can be seen in this figure, we first use a low-cost force-field method to generate the geometry of each individual chemicals involved in the reaction, which is significantly faster than the high-level DFT with the high-level theory, and then rely on FRED denoising encoder to recover chemically meaningful structural embeddings, and then combine them using the multi-head attentions or also with the mask attention pooling so that the model can learn interactions between the chemicals rather than simple concatenation. So for example, multi-head attention can learn how a particular halide interact with the ligands or additive influence the ligand sphere implicitly. And different attention heads capture the different type of interactions like electronic effects, static congestions, or compatibility patterns, and so on. And after that, using the reaction embedding, we make predictions for percentage yield. And then we evaluated the generalization capability of the model to unseen halide, base, and ligands and additives, which is much harder test than the random splitting. And across the all category, this FRED-based model outperform the modern reaction yield predictions, such as yield BERTs or crystal yield. By the way, yield BERTs were pre-trained on the large reaction corpus, but in our case, we only used molecular database. We didn't use any reaction database for the pre-training. We only used Berg-Hartwig reactions for fine-tuning. And what is particularly worth noting is that the model does not use any quantum mechanical geometry, DFT calculated static electronic descriptors. So fractional denoising pre-training give its strong geometry intuition, letting it leverage subtle 3D features, and important for and those are important for cross-coupling reactions. So in summary, this work makes it a great foundation for reaction context-aware modeling. And it connects nicely to the next part of my talk, where we incorporate explicit transition state structure and 3D geometry in predicting solvent effect. So earlier, we saw how solvent choice can dramatically influence reaction rates and how this makes optimization difficult. So another problem we've been working on is predicting how solvents actually modify the activation barrier, the Gibbs free energy of reaction. And that comes down to modeling the transition states and its solvent stabilization. The quantity we want to predict is the solvent contribution to the activation energy, here delta G solve, which let us estimate relative reaction rate constant. And also we are talking about liquid phase reaction in this case. And having the predictive model for this solvation energy can allow us to evaluate and design better solvent to enhance the reaction kinetics. And also maybe we can identify the greener solvents in much faster. So to address the high computational cost of calculating this quantity, usually to calculate this delta G, you need DFT level calculations. And to avoid this computational cost, machine learning models have gained increasing attention these days. But current models still face two major limitations. First, most require a pre-computed transition state structure for training. This means they are only applicable to the reaction where transition state geometry already exists. Otherwise, you need to calculate the transition state by yourself, and it can take quite a bit of time. And second, when predicting solvation effects, many models still operate on 2D representations of the reactant and product only, and rely on model to implicitly infer transition states. So for example, 2D reaction graph, such as CGR, condensed graph of reaction, approximate the transition state by superimposing reactant and product. So the input for the prediction in this case are 2D graphs of reactant and product only. And this model still can provide high accuracy for these simple reactions, but their applicability is limited. And accuracy drops for more complex reactions. And it may show poor generalizations and also ignore some static factors that determine the barrier height. And so the objective of our study is to develop models that predict solvation energy and so solvent effects in reactions by incorporating 3D molecular geometry and transition state structure information explicitly. And as a first steps, we decided to investigate whether incorporating 3D geometrical representations and transition state structure explicitly can indeed improve the prediction accuracy and extrapolability. And also, given that the obtaining accurate transition state structure through DFT calculation require high computational cost, we initially introduced a data-driven transition state structure generator called reactivity, proposed by a research group at MIT, if I'm not wrong. And reactivity basically can generate transition state geometry from reactant and product pair through the optimal transport mapping. We then encode both the reactant and the transition states using an equivariant 3D encoder, Torch MDNet, which directly learns interatomic interaction through the distance-based attention. And using these 3D encodings, we evaluate several input configurations from using only reactant geometry to including transition states, each at different fidelity level. Here, suffix CLC calculation refers to the 3D geometry computed with the DFT. By the way, we didn't calculate this geometry. It was originally from the Grumble data set. The suffix GAF refers to the geometry generated using a chip force field method. And predict PRED refers to transition state structure predicted by reactivity. And combining these sources give us 4 distinct cases, allowing us to systematically measure how structural fidelity and the presence of transition state structure information impact model performance. And here you see the quantitative results. As you can see here, endpoint geometry alone, even in 3D, don't capture solvent effect properly. So this is the baseline that only use 2D graphs of reactant and product. But the incorporating just 3D structure doesn't really improve the accuracy. But incorporating just 3D structure for the reactant and product doesn't really improve the accuracy. But by including the transition states, we can dramatically improve the performance across the unseen reactant and solvents. And as can be seen from these results, the model is highly sensitive to structure fidelity. The highest fidelity transition states input yield the best result. So reliable transition state structure and a robust architecture are both critical to get the higher accuracy. Finally, we combined 2D and 3D representations in a dual modality model. The 3D encoder provides mechanistic information, geometric information, but it can be sensitive to noise in geometry. So we decided to combine with the 2D representations, which is less expressive, but very stable and also fast to generate. So by combining these 2 types of representation, we observed that the model can prioritize whichever representation is more reliable for a given reaction. And this led to the lowest overall root mean squared error and a more robust predictor of solvation energy. So alongside reaction kinetics, we also exploring a complementary directions, solvation beyond reaction pathway, focusing on thermodynamic solubility, equilibrium solubility. Here, the goal is to model solubility directly from the molecular structure, capturing solute and solvent interactions, and also how this interaction change with temperature. So most existing model treat like ChemProp and FastProp treat temperature as just an external scalar input, but solubility is a thermodynamic property, which means molecular interactions, conformations, even dominant non-covalent force shift continuously with temperature. So the question we wanted to tackle was, can we build molecular representations that are explicitly conditioned on temperature rather than simply supplying temperature as another input? So here is how we incorporate temperature into the molecular representations. We use a film, or you can call it as a feature-wise linear modulations. Temperature is first expanded using an RBF kernel, then passed through the neural network to produce scaling and shifting the parameter for each molecular features. These gamma and beta value modulate the latent representation, essentially telling the model how the solute and solvent features should change with temperature. And by conditioning these learned or fixed feature, we obtain a temperature-conditioned molecular representation that the finer network use to predict solubility. So we apply these conditioning idea and compared with the 2 state-of-art model, ChemProp, message passing neural network, FastProp, another machine learning model that use a fixed descriptor like moderate or adequate descriptors. In the interest of time, I won't go all the details, but as you can see in this slide, the most distinctive improvement appears above 330 Kelvin, where the data were very sparse. There were less than 5% of the overall data in these temperature ranges. So compared to ChemProp, film reduced error by 13 to 51%, showing the strong robustness in such high temperature regime. And this suggests that the model is capturing nonlinear temperature solid-solvent couplings. And at high temperature, polar interactions weaken and dispersion becomes more dominant, and also entropic effect may increase. And the conditioning layer helps the model. Conditioning layer helps the model dynamically. This conditioning layer helps the model dynamically reweight this contribution. It also reduced the overfitting to low temperature data, which dominates the data sets. So overall, we can say that film improved the robustness, specifically in underrepresented temperature regimes. In extrapolation to completely unseen solids, temperature conditioning again improves the performance by 15 to 20% across two external data sets. The model also maintains better accuracy at high temperature and consistent with the earlier result. So based on this, we are also currently working on the binary mixture solvent as well. Hopefully we can show and present some results on this binary mixture case. And we definitely want to use this predictive model to design the greener solvents. So basically to reduce the use of toxic solvents such as DMF. So conclusion here is, yes, we've looked at how we can bridge the molecular designs and also the reaction optimization through the AI and automation. And take-home message here is integrating automations with the mechanistically grounded machine learning model across reaction kinetics, solvent design, and solubility enable more reliable, scalable, and data-efficient reaction optimization pipelines. And I'd like to especially thanks to my students who contribute to these slides, Yang Fang, Yongkyu Lee, Dan Shin, and Zhongyu Chu, Mengzi Zhu. Without them, I couldn't really present the result today.